Welcome everyone to an American TESOL Institute webinar. I'm your host, Jason Levine, also known or better known probably as Fluency MC. Our topic today is top 10 tips for teaching verbs. You know, I like that alliteration with the top 10 tips for teaching. These are my tips, which doesn't mean they are the best tips. It just means that they are, in my experience as a teacher and teacher trainer, advice, suggestions that I think are important. And in this case, in particular, I can think of many more tips because teaching verbs is such an important and rich area of English language teaching. We're going to talk about why in a moment and throughout. So these are certainly not the 10 best or most important or anything like that. They are 10 that I chose for this particular webinar, and I hope they can help you whether you are getting started as an English teacher or you have experience as an English teacher. Before we get to the tips themselves, I have a question for you. Those of you who are here live, you could answer, and those of you watching the recording could answer also. Of the most common 100 words in spoken American English, how many do you think are verbs, nouns, adjectives, and adverbs? So especially verbs, because we're talking about verbs, but you might also think about the others. I'm basing this on the COCA, which is the Corpus of Contemporary American English, Spoken English, which is a great corpus, but of course it's only one corpus and it is American English. But when you look at the most common 100 words across corpora, you see a lot of overlap, similar data. So what do you think? 40 to 45 out of 100? Maybe like combined, okay. You meant verbs. Oh, I see. Okay, I think you're closer, Guadalupe, to the total. Let's have a look. You might be surprised. Total, this is what I was saying for Guadalupe, total 36 out of 100 most common words in spoken English are, yeah, the verbs are more. We got it. Good. It's important also which verbs are the most frequent. So that's my first tip. Know the most high frequency verbs in English and incorporate them into your materials. Now that might seem obvious, and you may assume that the textbooks you have, materials you find on the internet are going to focus on the most frequent, most common verbs, but that's not necessarily true. So let's take a look at what those most common verbs are. Anyone want to take a guess which verbs are the most common? I'm a little crazy because I can tell you off the top of my head the 100 most common verbs because I'm so obsessed with corpora and I'm so obsessed with rhythm and rhyme. So I made a little rhyme to remember them. And this list includes the modal verbs. Get number one, you're close. Let's see. Get is number 6. Or it's number 7 if you include the most common modal verb, which is can. Set is further down the list than you might imagine. It's something like 30. Have is number 2. Here we go. But my list includes modal verbs because I really like knowing the most common modal verbs. There you go, take. It's be, have, do, say, go. Can, get, would, make, know, will, think, take, seek, come, could, want, look, use, find, give, tell, work, may, should, call, try, ask, need, feel, become, leave, put, mean, keep, let, begin, seen, help, talk, turn, start, might, show, hear, play, run, move, like, live, believe, hold, bring, happen, must, write, provide, sit, stand, lose, pay, meet, include, continue, set, learn, change, lead, understand, watch, follow, stop, create, speak, read, allow, add, spend, grow, open, walk, win, offer, remember, love, consider, appear, buy, wait, serve, die, send, expect, build, stay, fall, cut, reach, kill, remain. That's the top 100 verbs, peace and respect. These are the most common verbs, and they are in the top 100 words. What do you notice about these verbs? Is there anything you notice that they have in common? I noticed 2 things especially, but there may be more. You may notice that in this list, there is only one. Oh, excuse me, there are 3. The majority are irregular. That's right. So only 3 of them, want, look, use, are regular. And if you keep going down the list, well, let's look at the next slide. This is very interesting. This is the list that I just told you from my memory. Look how many irregular verbs. Somebody mentioned sense verbs. So those are also very common, and delexicalized verbs. We're going to talk about those. Tip number 2, introduce the concept of time frames. So if you know which verbs are the most common and you're going to try to make sure your students get a lot of practice with those verbs, of course, you're going to think about verb tense. And there's a lot of debate about when to teach which verb tense and how. And they're not always clear right or wrong answers there. It can depend on the age of your learners, the style of your learners, their first language, right? All kinds of variables. But I think one thing that I hope all of us can agree on is that the concept of time frames is very important for you as a teacher to consider and to introduce to your students. Now, what I mean, of course, is in English, the past, present, and future, and it's not always the same in every language. But in English, we have these time frames and we have these tenses. Now, what do you think of a chart like this? I can think of advantages and disadvantages to a chart like this. How about you? It is good, of course, to see that there are these different aspects, right? The simple, progressive, and perfect. And these tenses, these time frames, present, past, and future. But I don't think you get a very good sense of time frames from this chart. You get a sense of the form. And then what does present mean? Because here we have, I eat and I am eating, but that's a very different idea of the time frame. And that's not clear here. And then also for future, right? We don't have a future form. And we have different ways to express future, including the present continuous. This could be a good thing to refer to for form. How can you introduce the concept of time frames? Well, I have a song I wrote, so definitely in context, whether it's the students' lives or a story. This is a story, a song I wrote called Intense. Do you get it? Intense, intense. And the first part of the song is the present time frame. So there are examples of present simple. I wake up early in the morning. Focusing students on what does that mean? Does that mean now? Or, oh, no, that's routine. Oh, when do you wake up? In general. Every morning. Sometimes. Never, right? Those time adverbials. Right now, I'm waiting for the subway. That now is not present simple. And we'll talk about in a few moments why it's so important to teach, I believe, present continuous for present before you get into a lot of the present simple verbs and sentences with them, or else later what happens, right? You have people saying, right, oh, what are you doing? What are you doing? Oh, I drink coffee, I talk to my friend, right? You really got to get that present continuous in there. And that's why when you see it in terms of time frame, I think it can really help. And even present perfect. Oh, that has to come later. And that's more like a past idea. Well, it's better, I think, taught with present verbs to really see that it is about your experience now, containing things that may have happened in the past and continue, or just that are important to who you are now. So this is obviously a little higher level. Then you'd want to introduce it to students for the first time. And then the song continues. Well, what is past, instead of past tense, what is the past time frame? Well, it includes the simple past, the past continuous, the past perfect, and you could also get into the past perfect continuous. So there are many great games and activities out there. The idea is, though, to focus on materials that either encourage your students to create sentences in context, practicing different ways to express past with different forms, and here's the future. Notice next week, he's coming over. Present continuous, so important to express future. Tip number 3, teach the verb be. Usually first, right? Almost always, with high frequency nouns, adjectives, prepositional phrases, and the present continuous. So I strongly believe that when you start with be, you're really thinking about not so much the form is important, but getting that form out there through, okay, what are the most high frequency nouns? You can look at lists like the Coco. You can think about who your students are. I am a student. She is a teacher. But adjectives, get them right away, right? Happy, sad. Prepositional phrases, don't forget them at this early stage when you're teaching the verb to be. At school, on the bus, right? And then present continuous. Probably before you get into I live, I go, I eat, right? What are you doing now? We're already have the verb to be. You're already conjugating that. So take advantage of that. Go right into present continuous. Make sure students get a great deal of practice with short forms. What am I talking about here? Well, it's interesting when you think of native speakers of English or very advanced speakers of English, don't have to be native. If somebody says, so did you go to that party? And how often would a native speaker say, yes, I did, or no, I didn't? Did you go to that party? Yeah, it was great. Did you go to that party? No, I didn't have time. The problem, though, if you're learning English, is if you answer yeah, no, you are not practicing the grammar for that particular tense. So one very cool strategy is helping your students practice those short forms. This is also true with asking questions and negative forms. But let's talk just now about the short forms. You can talk about this with them, that maybe it seems unnatural if somebody says, oh, are you ready? Yes, I am. No, I'm not. But if they don't practice the short forms, it's much less likely they're going to get those forms in their heads. And then what? More difficult to make your own sentences. So I see out there sometimes people saying, why are these books teaching like the short forms? Nobody says, no, I have, yes, I have, no, I haven't. Yes, she was, no, she wasn't. Well, like I said, native speakers and very advanced speakers already have the ability to make questions like, did you or didn't you? So that's the issue I find. When students do a lot of practice with the short forms, I'm going to give you an example now. It's much easier for them to use the grammar for in general to ask questions, make negatives. So for example, I have a song called Are You or Aren't You, right? So the song goes, are you or aren't you? Yes, I am. No, I'm not. Am I or aren't I? Yes, you are. No, you're not. Is he or isn't he? Is she or isn't she? Yes, he is. No, he isn't. Yes, she is. No, she's not. This part of the song is just like drilling to get those forms, lots of exposure, seeing it and hearing it, repeating it. And then practice like this. Are you happy? Is she strong? So again, you say, is she strong? Yep. But then when you want to say, oh, she is, you're going to say, right? She is, right? Isn't, right? You got to practice those so it's very quick to make your own sentences. Same with the negatives. Are you sad? Is she boring? You get the idea. Also, notice something we talked about for the tip before this. So I kind of put them together. What else do we have here? Common adjectives, right? Present continuous, right? So you're also getting that practice. Moving on to tip number 5. With the present simple, make sure students get extensive practice with third person singular S. Now, you might say, but is that so important, the S? Does it interfere with communication? This is a very, very important issue, I think. Well, if somebody says, oh, my friend like hip hop music, absolutely, it does not interfere with communication. If that's the goal, then fine. And in everyday conversation, right, it's not going to be an issue. Where it will become an issue, however, is in an email. If it's a formal email and someone is judging your English, which is reality for many of you, or many of your students, giving a presentation where people are, again, paying more attention maybe and more judgmental. So I don't think just drilling to get the S is the idea. It's materials that are engaging, interesting. I have a little activity And you could do something similar where I first focus on collocations with verbs and nouns, something we're going to talk about in another tip. So trying to match the verb in red with the noun in blue. And I created this activity so there's only one way it works. So even though you could collocate a couple or maybe even three of these nouns with a few of these verbs here, there's only one way to match them. So this is not just an S activity, like I said, not just like let's learn S, but notice what happens next. So once they do it, and here is the solution, the next thing is, oh, if you're making sentences with he or she, what would you do? So you get them to do, she takes a course, she asks a question, he makes, right? And the next thing you do, because I do this with S's for third person, singular and plural, you do it with she takes courses, she asks questions, she plays games, really getting that S again and again through speaking and writing it down. But if you're thinking, is that enough to really get the S in their heads? I don't think so. So I made a song. Yes, I make songs for almost everything, but not everything. I promise. I'm going to show you something tonight that's not about songs. But I made this, and notice the question form, does she, right, take? So no S on take. That's really, when you think about it, a very complicated idea for what's supposed to be very simple grammar. But if you study it, you're not going to necessarily, actually probably won't, be more accurate. You need to just repeat it enough times in some activity that's engaging. So if your students think this is engaging, mine do, then I recommend something like this. Does she take courses? Yes, she takes them. She takes English and math. Notice the stress on in the bold. Does she ask questions? Yes, she does. She asks questions in class. Does he play games? Yes, he plays them. He plays games with his buddies. Does he use computers? Yes, he uses them to study. Does she do sports? Yes, she does. She does sports every weekend. Does she have dreams? Yes, she has them. She has dreams and she'll achieve them. It goes on from there. So when you do present simple, when you're introducing it, you're going to want to focus on S, of course, on questions, on negatives. This doesn't have negatives in it, but you could also make negatives from this. Does she take courses? No, she doesn't, right? You can change this to past. Did she take courses? Yes, she took them. She took, right? So lots of things you can do with something like this. Tip number 6. Ooh, so we're halfway through. Always include the most common time adverbials. So, does she take courses? Does she take courses? Yes, she takes them. Can you add time adverbials? Oh, she takes them every semester. Does she ask questions? Yes, she does. She asks questions in class every day. Oh, she sometimes asks questions in class. So either presenting those or having lists of adverbials. Time adverbials are so important that it explains why when your students do not use past tense, for example, they're usually understood if the time adverbial is there. Hey, what'd you do yesterday? Oh, last night I go out with my friends. Communication is fine. There is no misunderstanding of time because of that time adverbial. But once again, in an email, in a presentation, in a report, not using past tense could be a problem. Number 7, teach delexicalized verbs with collocations. Well, first of all, what are delexicalized verbs? I referred to them earlier. These are verbs that on their own don't really carry the meaning because the meaning comes with the collocations that go with them. So verbs like get, put, take, what do they mean? It's not easy. Set. It's not easy to explain. Moreover, we should not be explaining the meanings of them, right? Because that's not how they're learned. Kids don't learn what take means. There's no one explaining the definition of take, right? So this will just confuse students if they're trying to think of what the meanings are of these verbs. So any verb should be with a collocation, right? But a verb, for example, like run, is more obvious what it means. Well, that's not true because it can be idiomatic as well. Well, let's look at a list and maybe I'll think of a better example to show you. So here in blue, I've put verbs that would be on a list of delexicalized verbs. There are others here, possibly. And some, it depends, like run. There's the meaning of run, like to run, but then run a company, right? Run out of something, the phrasal verbs. But if you think of something like help, right? You could really, it's good to have a collocation, right? Help your friends, help with a problem, okay. But you really need the collocations for the verbs in blue here, especially because of how high frequency they are. I mean, look at the first line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these verbs are verbs that really need collocations for your students to be able to use them. I make a lot of songs with collocations. I have one for have, which goes like this: have a party, have fun, have a cold, have a problem, have good weather, have a get together, have a test, have trouble, have friends, have plans, have a good time. You have it in you. Another one is make or do. The other thing with delexicalized verbs is often you have this two meanings where in the first language of your students, there is only one. So it could be take and get, do, make, say, tell. So in those cases, it's even more important to have some kind of practice where they get used to the most common collocations. That's right, it's do homework. And if you're thinking, well, but there's a reason it's do or make. You know, do is action, make is create. Well, if it were that easy, students wouldn't make so many mistakes or do so many mistakes. Make so many mistakes. And of course, people learning English as their first language are not learning a difference in the meaning of do and make. They are learning collocations. This is how we learn meanings of delexicalized verbs. A comment here, that's true in Chinese. We see the same thing for do and make homework. Yes, French also, and many languages. Yes, it's make an effort. What about lists of verbs plus nouns? Lists are nice, but the lists cannot just get in your head. So a list can be good. Okay, here are some common collocations. Of course, lists are all over the internet and in reference books. But what do you do with those lists? So if you have a good list, and I think the collocations here, these are high frequency, and students understand them, then yeah, you could write sentences, you could make songs, you can play games, you can do different things to get the I can't speak today. You can do different types of activities to get the repetitive exposure needed to remember and use these collocations. So I have games, not just a song. I have a lot of stuff with make or do, but here's part of my song. I make sure to do my homework, then I hit the sack. I make a to-do list to stay on track. I need to do a few errands. I'll be right back. Make yourself at home, be my guest, make a snack. Believe it or not, I'm going to show you something tonight that is not a song. It's coming. Two things I would suggest for practicing verbs. Tip number 8, teach modal verbs, phrasal verbs, and irregular verbs at every level. Wow, this is such an important one. I know you out there watching, if you're an English teacher, you're not one of those teachers that thinks there's a certain point where you start talking about modal verbs, phrasal verbs, or irregular verbs. Irregular verbs, I understand. If you're teaching, right, very low level students and you're not doing past tense yet, okay, you're not doing irregular verbs, but modal verbs and phrasal verbs, get them in early. The mistakes I see with modal verbs later, I'm telling you, it's because they weren't introduced early enough, right? If you introduce them early enough and get enough practice with them. So I'm not talking about the less common ones. We have a list earlier where you saw the most common ones, right? Can, would, will, right? So especially can, because if all the modal verbs follow the same pattern of the base form afterwards. So can go, can do, can see. If they get really comfortable with that, right, it's going to be easier later to bring in other modal verbs and have them be very clear on how the grammar works. Phrasal verbs, they're not just for intermediate and advanced students, right? Especially learning prepositions, teach them the same time, right? So you're going to go in, you're going to go out, the adverbials there, put it on, take it off, right? Turn it on, turn it off. Yes, there's a song for that too, and games. But yeah, that needs to happen early. Then later, they will not feel like, oh my God, modal verbs, phrasal verbs. And irregular verbs, as soon as you're teaching past tense, please, not all of the irregular verbs. Don't think, oh, here's the list, right? Again, it's back to frequency. Remember which verbs are the most common in English? You need to get them very comfortable with went, took, right? Got. That's super important. Had. Very, very, very early. Do not wait too long for that. This is a game I have on Bamboozle, and I'm going to give you a link to my games there. This is clearly a more advanced game for phrasal verbs. I have games for lower levels, all types of games for verbs and other things, and you can make your own verbs. That's bamboozle.com. Do you have a way to make students learn the irregulars in a better way? I'm so glad you asked. If you don't know, I have an irregular verb song called Stick, Stuck, Stuck. And I have Stick To, which is the follow-up to Stick, Stuck, Stuck. So if you don't know it, you can check it out. Fluent CMC. Stick To has verbs that are not in the first one. So if you do know my song, oh, you do know my song. You didn't know it was me. Okay, that happens a lot. Okay, so you know my song, great. If you like that song, then check out this one. This one is better for more advanced learners for sure, and that's the idea, right? If they like the first one and they understand it, then they can check out this one as well, right? So this one goes, I'll just demonstrate a little bit of it. You can check it out online if you like, right? It goes, I'm back once again to strike, struck, struck. Listen up, it's part 2 of Stick, Stuck, Stuck. People say, said, said. When they read, 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 and listen to the lyrics, they stay in their heads. So I sped the news. I spread, to hit you with more to get ahead. As I set these verbs to rhyme. Just let them flow into your mind. In the future, I'm going to have more games through Bamboozle and some other apps, I hope, to practice with songs and also other ways to have fun with verbs, and not just verbs, but starting off, I think, with irregular verbs. Tip number 9, we have 2 more tips. And then if you have questions or comments, those of you who are here live, I'm happy to chat with you. Tip number 9, for past time, practice ED endings, especially the pronunciation of ED endings, and the most common irregular verbs. I mentioned earlier how if you speak with someone informally and you use time adverbials in the past, like yesterday I go, yesterday I see, no one will correct you and they will understand you, which is good and bad, right? Like the communication will be okay, but you will continue because they won't correct you to make these mistakes. And then it's going to be harder when when you're in a situation where grammatical accuracy is more important. So I promised you I had something that's not a song and it's not a game, although I gamify it and I made a song from it, but it's a small thing compared to what this is. I wrote a book, a short book with different chapters, all past tense, all high frequency verbs like I've been talking about tonight. It's a story. So not a song, it's a story. It doesn't rhyme. Look, if you look, there are no rhymes here. I do have the stress marked, right? And this is the first chapter, Getting Ready. It's a story about someone. It could be a man or a woman. It's in the first person, so it's I. It's a story about a person, an adult, who, as you can see, woke up, got out of bed, went to the bathroom, etc., got ready to go to work. And the next chapter is about what happened that morning at the person's job. It continues throughout the day. I haven't published this. I've been using it with my students. I've had a lot of success with it, so I hope to put it out there. So there's a lot of stuff happening here. First of all, you see a lot of irregular verbs and regular verbs that are common for this context, which is daily routines, but it's in the past. Incidentally, I also have this for present simple for lower levels, and for that, it's about someone getting ready for school. So I use that one with kids, right? So the sun came up, my alarm went off, I woke up, etc., etc. You can do a lot of traditional fun activities with something like this. You can cut parts of the story up, have them try to put it together. I have activities with collocations where I separate the verbs so they have to match. Alarm went off, made the bed, crossed the street. It's that repetitive exposure to the verbs, to practicing the ed endings: crossed, reached, changed, which for so many people present difficulty, and that can be a problem sometimes in communication if the pronunciation is all over the place with those. But essentially, it's about everything we've been talking about today: collocations, high frequency verbs, and getting a lot of exposure to the form. Tip number 10, and then we'll stop for some questions and comments. For future time, because we talked about present and past, I didn't get into present perfect at all. I'm thinking about doing a present perfect webinar. In fact, I'm sure I'm going to do a present perfect webinar because I didn't talk about it at all here, because it's just such an important but big area. A few things I packed in here to the last tip, for the last tip about future. Teach going to and present continuous for plans. So yes, you can talk about, and for anything that's not what I'm saying here for will, of course, you can talk about, what will happen in the future and what is going to happen in the future. But in my experience, going to, for almost everything having to do with the future works, right? So not thinking, okay, will and going to can both be used for this. It's possible sometimes, but try to separate them. When you're making plans, tomorrow I'm having lunch with my dad, right? Tomorrow I'm going to have lunch with my dad, right? A lot of practice with that. And then practice with will, which doesn't happen enough, and practicing the contractions idle. So my French students, right? Because you can use present simple for this you can say, like, if someone says, oh, the phone's ringing, oh, I get it, right? No, I'll get it, right? So that I'll, she'll, we'll really need that for the offers, promises, and decisions. Plus, it's so functional, practicing things like promises. I'll be there. I'll do it for you, right? This is such important functional language. This is where I think you should almost exclusively focus on future. I do not think you should do so much with future continuous unless they're at levels, more advanced levels. And so what I see too often is not enough of this, and teachers moving on too quickly to future continuous, which is not that common. Not that it isn't important, but it's certainly not as important as getting students very comfortable with what you see here. And then, oh my goodness, future perfect and future perfect progressive, they're rare and overwhelming. And again, not as important as getting a lot of practice with using going to and present continuous for plans, and will for offers, promises, and decisions. Let me remind you of what I feel is the most important lesson that we can teach our students, which is that practice builds accuracy. Meaning, if you listen to a song, like one of my songs, many times, and you remember the S on the verb, or you remember time adverbials, you remember past tense, you have more accurate English. It doesn't mean perfect. It means, oh, I remember. That's it. And people understand better. I can express myself more accurately. That makes you more confident. So you're not focusing on fluency first so much as building to fluency this way. With that confidence, oh, I can use these verb tenses, right? I got them here, and that's through the practice more than the studying. That's when you feel more, I'm ready to speak more fluently, and people will understand you better, and you'll understand them better as a result. All right, folks, well, those are our top 10 tips, or I should say my top 10 tips. If you have other ideas, you have tips, please put them in the comments wherever you see this recording. Please stay tuned for more American TESOL Institute webinars, including our featured teachers series once a month. As always, it's been a pleasure, a privilege hosting this webinar for American TESOL Institute. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day wherever you are. See you next time. English teachers worldwide. Salutes. Peace. Respect. Bye-bye.